We're joined now by Dr. Eddie Glaude Jr., who's the chair of the Center for African American Studies at Princeton University. He's got a book out called Democracy in Black, How Race Still Enslaves the American Soul. Eddie, thanks for coming back on the show. Bigotry, big topic in our campaign right now.
Yeah.
Donald Trump calls Hillary Clinton a bigot. Hillary Clinton basically calls Donald Trump a bigot. You say that's really an argument that only interests white people.
Yeah, it's not really about black folks, is it? It's really about who can be labeled what their positions are, and it's kind of indicative of the very ways in which African Americans are being courted in this election cycle. It's actually consistent with how we're often treated in these election cycles, and that is just simply as chess pawns to be moved about and not as kind of thinking, rational political actors. And so to call Hillary Clinton a bigot is in some ways to say, I'm not a bigot. Right. And for Hillary Clinton to say, well, just let's look at what he said, really has little to do with, well, what about the housing crisis and what happened in African American communities? What about double-digit unemployment? What about public education? What about employment, jobs? I mean, we can just, what about the current state of black communities, and how are your policies going to respond to that? So in some ways, John and Nicole, it's typical American racial theater. And typical American racial theater has little to do with black people. It has an effect on black people, but it has little to do with black people.
And what do you attribute that? I mean, why is that where we are? I mean, it sounds like that's your assessment of the state of the conversation around race. I have to say, I think these issues are more fraught and more complicated to discuss now than at any other point in my professional life. Yeah. What do you attribute that to?
Well, it has something to do, I think, with the vitriol unleashed by the election of Barack Obama. I talk about in the book something called the value gap. We talk about the achievement gap and the wealth gap and even the empathy gap, but underneath it all is something more fundamental that is called the value gap, and that is the belief that white people matter more than others. And so when we tell the history of the country, right, even in the moment in which
but nobody raises their kids to think that.
No,
so when does it? Where
it's
does
baked in. It's not about an explicit belief. It's actually based in the oxygen. I always tell the story about all you got to do. You learn race. You learn the value gap. It's just by simply moving about in space. Just driving in certain communities and driving out of those communities. We learn how certain folks are valued, how certain folks aren't valued, just by going to school, going to work. So all of this stuff is circulating. And even when we thought we turned a corner, right, with the election of the first African-American president, what did we see in response? We saw the vitriol of the Tea Party. We saw a wholesale attack on the voting rights of people of color. So it's a reassertion of I think, the value gap.
We have seen over the course of the past couple weeks Donald Trump doing this kind of ostentatious outreach, ostensible outreach to African Americans, although he has not yet spoken really in front of African American audiences.
Right.
But there's an argument he's making, which is that Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party take African American votes for granted and then don't do very much in terms of their policies. Now, put aside the question of whether you think Trump would be any better.
Right.
Is there something to the argument?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In political science literature, my colleague Paul Freimer talks about African American voters as a captured electorate. And that is, the Democrats can take them for granted. The only thing they have to do is deliver them every 2 and 4 years with no promise of delivering on policy. And the Republicans just have to take a certain percentage in order to jeopardize the Democrats' chance of voting. But they really don't care or are concerned about the issues facing black communities. So what you have is a kind of a constituency that has a distorted relationship to the democratic process. In other words, folk try to herd us to the polls like cattle chewing cud, right? And so I think Trump is the wrong messenger.
Right.
Right? I mean, I can't take him seriously. I can't even take some Republicans seriously. Look at what's happening in North Carolina. Right? So Republicans are going to say, give us a chance. And you say, okay, we're going to give you a chance about cutting capital gains, give you a chance about cutting estate taxes, give you a chance about, purging voter rolls, give you... That's not sincere.
Do you think of how about Paul Ryan on poverty? I mean, is there any Republican doing any policy that opens your mind to a Republican? Any Republican?
Not to my, it doesn't,
on any issue, I'm not saying just on the conversation on race, but are there issues around which you could see being open to a Republican? You have problems with Hillary Clinton, right?
I have deep problems with Hillary Clinton. And right now, no Republican comes to mind. Paul Ryan, I have to take as insincere. I mean, think about this moment. How can I take Paul Ryan seriously? Right? When he talks about poverty, he talks about race, he backs up on, he backtracks on the comments he made earlier with regards to welfare and others, culture of poverty. And then when they say Trump is a racist, he doesn't condemn him, right? So it's okay to have a racist as your nominee, but yet you're going to be sincere in talking about these issues. it's just a contradiction.
You've gotten a lot of grief for this, and we don't
Yeah.
have a lot of time here,
Yeah.
and we ran over on that last block. But I got to ask you.
That's
you
a shame.
I got to ask you. You've said that Donald Trump's more dangerous than the Ku Klux Klan,
Right.
and yet you're not going to vote for Hillary Clinton.
Right.
How do you reconcile that in your mind?
Well, I don't want to vote from a position of fear. Right. I want to vote from a position of power. And to my mind, I live in a blue state, a relatively blue state. I can actually vote my conscience. I think if you live in a battleground state, it makes sense to me to vote for Hillary Clinton. But Hillary Clinton's politics aren't my politics. As she's courting Republicans, she's taking progressives for granted. And I think we don't need to let our fear of Donald Trump keep us from vetting the policies of Hillary Clinton.